Great, that one's rolling. Audio's rolling.
Audio, are we rolling?
Yeah.
Are we rolling right now?
We'll try to talk pretty loud.
Thank you.
Okay, this is Listen to This Kanye podcast episode. Take one.
you scared the dogs as you did the cut. We're putting that in there, you know.
For all the dogs.
Yeah, for all the dogs. We'll get into that, you know.
Sure.
But welcome, as he said, to the Listen to This podcast. I'm your host, Lance Franco, and I'm here with my good buddy, my old high school friend. Would you like to introduce yourself,
sure.
good sir?
Hello, everyone. Hello.
We got three
I
cameras
guess that
rolling.
was on me. Hello. My name is George Khoury. I am a senior film directing student attending Biola University, and I was friends with Lance back in high school, and I'm honored
You were friends.
We are no longer friends.
Yeah, we're no longer
deep enemies, as we'll explain today. But
absolutely.
But
Just moving that a little bit.
Micro adjustments as always. But today we'll be talking about back in high school, one of the main things we bonded over actually was Kanye West.
Absolutely.
And our love-hate relationship with him, and so it felt fitting that today we would talk about that very man.
And I think that all started through what you would consider to be, quote unquote, inarguably the greatest era in the history of Kanye West, which was the Jesus is King era.
Yeah.
And we'll get into that in a little bit.
Undefeated.
So, we are gathering here today because we are gravely concerned about Kanye West and the current state of mind that he is in, both personally and professionally. Especially with the recent release of Vultures 2, which I played a couple songs for you. I played the good songs for him, the songs that were worth playing. And with that being said, it feels very clear to me that with Vultures 2, it really is continuing this trend really this year of just Kanye wanting to not really there's my dog Dolly for all the dogs wants to not really be in the mindset of being hungry about this music making thing anymore, in my opinion. And we're gonna dive into that with just all of the eras, Kanye West, the Eras tour,
Exactly.
But specifically a deep look into the eras that, here comes Copper because she saw Dolly getting all the attention. Kanye West, the eras that really the press and the media started to turn on him and have gradually turned on him throughout the years. Arguably for good and bad reasons both. So with that being said, what are your overall thoughts on just the whole state of Kanye West in 2024 before we dive into his eras?
I think, always with Kanye, there's always the sense of he can kind of go through anything and he'll be fine.
Yeah.
Just because of how many times we'll go through today that he has done that. But I think it's interesting because it seems like he's in such a unique place where he's never had this much, even when he had critical support, most of the time he still had public support.
Yeah.
From a maybe a silent majority at times, maybe a silent minority, but there's always been public support where I feel like now more than ever he's lost public support. I feel like he's lost the cool guy figure that he was known for, even amongst all his scandals, with some of the recent stuff. So I think really for me, the central question today, and I believe for both of us, is wondering whether Kanye West or not will ever be able to recover from this current slump and current sort of recession into infamy.
I like that word, recession, that you use. And to really reflect on this current era that he's in, we do have to take a look at just really all of the times, like most of the times that he's had that backlash against him, but he's recovered from it, clearly. And we can really start with the very first quote-unquote documented incident with Kanye West, with the Hurricane Katrina relief show, where he went off script and he was like, George Bush doesn't care about black people. And we were watching an interview last night where former President George W. Bush said, it was one of the lowest moments in his presidency, and you had some words to say about it.
It's crazy that he would say that was. I think he even said it was the lowest point in presidency. Maybe
Which,
one of
it
but considering 9/11 occurred in this presidency, to say that Kanye West, what Kanye West had to say about him being the lowest point over that, I guess at least shows the influence of Kanye and how much people care about what he thinks.
Yeah. Yeah, and that, caused very significant backlash and controversy. Not a career ender by any means, but, folks like to trip about the public comments that were made, especially when you're at the position you were at. I believe he already had released late registration, which was the next level for him. Post college dropout, post getting started in the industry, he wanted to establish himself as the guy in the rap industry. And when you have that image, comments like that, people tend to look at for influential purposes, and it creates so much controversy in the process, and it was labeled as not just from President George Bush but from others as one of the low points in his presidency, and it did receive that widespread media attention and criticism, and it was one of the first times that he would get that sort of criticism that ultimately kind of generated a new image for him in the process of someone to look out for those types of comments and for that type of controversy. And he apologized for it later on. I believe it was 2008 or somewhere along that era, where he admitted that although he meant what he said, that it wasn't the right thing to say at the time, especially when it comes to the Hurricane Katrina relief show setting. And in the big picture, it seems like a very small incident in Kanye's career, but it kind of creates that slippery slope of the intense media backlash that would soon follow. So
and I think part of it too, that I think maybe comes to the most up front in this drama, is a lot of the times what he's saying is there's actually some resonance with the public. I think a part of the interesting reaction to this is actually there's a group of people that did agree with him, maybe not with the same rhetoric, but that George Bush wasn't doing enough in Katrina and seemed to be showing favoritism, perhaps even racially based motives, and that was not what he said, was not completely just unimaginable. And so it's interesting going forward, thinking through these things, how often he's not just a random voice. He's almost saying what some people are thinking or feeling inside, but maybe afraid to express. And I think that will come up later as well. So it makes it interesting. The backlash is interesting because it's, in some ways, he's speaking for people that maybe the part that they don't want to admit what they're thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know we would follow up with another controversial magazine cover in the process, and I'll let you get more into that.
Oh yeah, for sure. Well, I feel like this is maybe a less discussed, lesser known sort of drama, because it's smaller, but I think it's important because I think obviously Christianity and his relationship with God is a really important thing in the life of Kanye.
Right.
And in his music and his personal life,
As we shall see.
Yeah. But here, and obviously one of his breakout hits was Jesus Walks, which was a hugely monumental rap song, explicitly Christian rap song, that was very successful and really, bloomed to success. So I think what's so interesting is when we get the cover for Rolling Stone magazine 2006 with him as Jesus Christ, it's really surprising. I think when I heard of it, I thought it was like a Jesus era thing, but this was 2006.
Right.
So just coming off of late registration, and he has this obviously the crown of thorns, and he's posed like him, and
the blood dripping.
Exactly.
Well,
Exactly. And this was around the same time as George Bush thing, and he has this sense. He says here, I even have the quote where he says, if I was more complacent and I let things slide, my life would be easier, but you all wouldn't be entertained. My misery is your pleasure, which is we were watching the Genius documentary in preparation for this, and it's interesting
great
how
documentary.
It is. It was a great documentary, and I think it's interesting how post college dropout, he seemed to be playing up into a character, or somehow he became more and more extreme version of himself.
Right.
And how he seemed to want to make him and his life a spectacle.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we see that in the way he started doing more bold things. And I think it's just so interesting to see how kind of that played out with the with that moment that he obviously lost him some support among his Christian fans, or at least the fans that were interested in him with his walk in faith, because it seemed like a switch up to what he had been doing with Jesus Walks.
Yeah, and I feel like what came up in my head just now was maybe we need to have a short dialogue of the reaction to Kanye doing it versus Kendrick also doing the same thing a number of years later. I believe it was at Glastonbury, before or just after, if I remember correctly, Mr. Morale came out, and he was dressed in a similar outfit, with the crown of thorns and the blood dripping out of his head, and the reaction to that, I believe, was also vehement online, with the same themes you were talking about Christianity, especially with Kendrick wanting to, at that period in time, convey music that was more personal to him in the process. So I don't know, what were your thoughts like when Kendrick did that, as compared to this topic of Kanye also portraying himself as such?
Yeah, well, obviously I was not alive, or I was alive, but I wasn't really thinking about.
But were you alive?
Exactly. I was alive, but I wasn't woke.
Yeah.
In 2006. So, I know when Kendrick did it, that had me, because I'm a Christian, and that had me much more skeptical about the album, and I don't think it caused me not to listen to the whole thing, and to be much more wary of what he was saying in his presence, because it felt I didn't see much beyond just sort of blasphemy and disrespectful behavior. Obviously, I'm sure there's some artistic statement going on. I would imagine he wouldn't do anything with that one, but I'm not one to just let art slide for art's sake, unless it can justify it pretty clearly, and I have a hard time finding that justified. So I know that if I was in 2006, I probably would have treated Kanye the same way. As a fan of Kendrick, I think having that reaction, to me, the same thing with Kanye. I think I would have had a hard time trusting him for the next album.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I feel like both of them play into this theme that we were discussing in great length last night about the duality of the man of God and the man of the world. And it's going to be a constant theme later, especially in like the Life of Pablo era, that we'll further discuss as well. So despite all of that, Kanye ended up releasing Graduation, which, if I look at my notes correctly, almost got 1 million copies sold first week, and he was arguably the biggest musician in the industry, like in 2007 and 2008. But we see during that era, tragedy strikes with his mother, Donda West, suddenly passing away from a liposuction that was being performed on her from complications of that. And a lot of people like to say that moment was the start of the downward spiral, as they call it, or like the slippery slope that Kanye West's career has been on to this very day. And we were watching the Genius documentary, and an interesting thing that we noticed was that only a week after her death, he was still on the Glow in the Dark tour performing, because it included a clip of him saying that it's what she would have wanted for him to keep performing, which, in retrospect, what do you think that was the right decision?
I think it's true that what she probably would have wanted, but I don't think it's what he needed.
I think so.
And I think in her wisdom she would have been able to diagnose that, just because especially for someone so close, you need time to mourn. And I feel like probably instead of being more celebratory, the tour ended up being more distractive.
Yeah.
And distracting him from the grief that he ought to have processed probably more healthily, though perhaps he felt it was too much to take and he just had to escape at that time.
Yeah. And he would be like, in the following months and year, he would make 808s and Heartbreak, extremely personal album, probably and this is my opinion, my favorite Kanye album of all time because of, growing up specifically in that era. That was the first Kanye West album that I remember listening to in full detail. But that was an extremely hard time for Kanye, and post 808s was where we would see like the first major incident that Kanye would affect public perception for himself on, which would be the VMAs incident in 2009 with Kanye interrupting Taylor Swift, accepting I believe it was the best female video
music
award.
Video, yeah.
Female music video award, because he thought that it would have better fit Beyonce's Single Ladies video to win that award, and he publicly interrupted, as we know infamously, Taylor Swift's acceptance speech, saying, "I'm gonna let you finish, but Beyonce had one of the best videos of all time." And then he would then drop the mic and flip off the crowd, soon after. And that was the first time that people really saw Kanye in that light of being negative. And that was really the first time that I think he was ever hated on that level in the spotlight. And, it's really just, insane to think about in the process that it wouldn't even be the worst thing Kanye ever did by a long shot. But we'll get to that in a little bit. Like, tell me your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I have the sense that, like we were saying earlier, each time Kanye has had one of these kind of wide popular fallouts. And I would say we could just, the magazine obviously is part of it, but I'd say generally we say the George Bush incident is one, this is number two.
Yeah.
I feel like each time he gets less and less resonant with the public, where I feel like, I think even at the time, and now especially, like I think there are people who would agree with Kanye and say, yeah, Beyonce's video is better. Knowing Kanye and his thoughts, it might even be a thought of like, well, Taylor's kind of this very marketable, white, southern blonde girl.
Yeah.
And she has this very cutesy video. And Beyonce's video is more out there, more risque and just sort of dangerous. And I wonder, I'm sure there are actual people who wrestle with, hey, did this win for politics' sake or was it generally better? I think, so again, I think there's some resonance with what Kanye is saying, but each time I feel like he's getting more on the fringe of what he believes and more on the fringe with how he shows it, and gets more extreme, sort of with that image. I think image is something too, just to add to what you've been saying, that's really important for Kanye. It was interesting in the documentary we were watching in Genius, there's a moment when he breaks his jaw, and the reason why he wants to fix it is he's like, oh, I need to look good, I'm an entertainer. And so I need to fix my jaw and have it look nice. And I think it's just really telling how Donda died from complications of liposuction, especially with what we'll talk about later with Kanye's own surgery. There's something with image and how you appear publicly, and there's I think Kanye is a man tormented by duality, in some good ways, some bad ways, and I think there's this weird mix of wanting to have this good public image, and yet at the same time, part of that is being able to throw it away in an instant, and being able to almost transcend that and go beyond it in this like grand public spectacle of being able to run up on stage and say this thing, and almost not caring for your image at all.
Right.
Which is just an interesting duality within him that I feel like comes up later. But yeah,
absolutely.
Those are my thoughts.
But the thing is, even with that incident, especially with where he kind of just took a break off the face of the earth for a little bit, spent some time in Hawaii, recorded the Dark Fantasy album, and released it to arguably the greatest acclaim that he's ever received from the industry, the fans, the critics alike. And it was really kind of telling that you couldn't still stop Kanye West from being Kanye West and being that, the biggest superstar in the hip hop industry up to this point. And I feel like with the Dark Fantasy album, he was very apologetic, and I think it was an open look into what he was going through at the time. You know, continuing that theme of duality with the dealing with the mental struggles that he had had at the time post Donda dying, but also still feeling like he needed to be that Kanye West persona of the lustful nature, the braggadocious nature as well. And speaking of braggadocious nature, that actually transitions perfectly into the next era we'll dive into, which was the Yeezus era, you know, which can be, I feel like it can be categorized into two things. Kanye's unrelenting tone when it came to interviews. Well, I feel like it could, two things, I should say. Kanye's unrelenting tone into like the interviews, the media, the paparazzi, who would be constantly harassing him at this point, and he would have that overt reaction to being swarmed, and you know, verbal and physical altercations would then soon follow. But also, I feel like this was the peak era when it came to Kanye's quote unquote God complex, and his, like, even saying in an interview, I just told you who I thought I was, a god. And you know, making a song straight up called I Am a God on the Yeezus album itself. And infamous interview moments in the process as well, not just with TMZ, but also like, you ain't got the answers, Sway. You ain't got the answers. And also that infamous Zane Lowe interview where the aforementioned I just told you I thought it was a god. Another moment being commenting on Lady Gaga's like deal with Polaroid, where it's like, I like some of the Gaga songs. What does she know about cameras? Tapping into that, you know, why do artists have to be this logo of brands that they don't even know about? But I feel like that Yeezus era was the peak of not the media hating him, but the media becoming so obsessed with him because of the previous context of his outbursts in the past. And you know, I'll let you dive more into it, but yeah, that Yeezus era was chaotic for him.
For sure. And I think really what provides the groundwork for that is the way by which, because if we're trying to understand how is Kanye responding to all of his criticism and controversy, I really think the way we should take My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy as sort of the beginning of this period is he doubles down, because he does make a few apologies here and there, but really I don't think he felt bad for what he did at the VMAs, really. You know, and I think at least maybe privately maybe he expressed apologies to Taylor and whatever, but I think at least as far as his public image goes, he wanted to lean in further, and I think he was able to do that because My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy was so successful and so beloved by fans. He was able to say, I like bring on the bravado, and even though he's being vulnerable in some lyrics, very much the energy of like a power or runaway, like there's a sense of like this is who I am, this is kind of the monster that I am that's like torn between heaven and hell, but like that's who I am, and like there's something almost very unapologetic about it. And I think perhaps after that point, it's like he won over the critics. Because he got the public to side with him again, and without a huge apology tour like another artist might have, like all this media of like, I'm sorry, I messed up. Like he didn't do that. He just dropped a banger album, kind of owning it. And taking that image they put on him and totally like embracing it, and to the extent where, you know, they couldn't really do anything. And I think what that does, like you're saying with Jesus, is now he's kind of the bad boy, and the critics number one enemy, and he's fully embraced it. And you see that obviously in the music, how gritty it is and how difficult it is to compared to other albums.
Yeah.
In content matter and even in thematic how it sounds, and just in obviously he's like attacks the paparazzi. The paparazzi's now become more enemies.
Yeah.
You know, and there's more just kind of this. I feel like in this era, it's just kind of leading off that where it's like he's finding the way to tackle the criticism. Is if he can embrace it, he can get the public on his side. And so even if the critics are not on his side, the public's on his side, and so he kind of has this bad boy persona that makes him interesting and likable. And I feel like he really plays into that.
Yeah, even not just plays in, but I feel like in my opinion took advantage of the idea that I could do anything I want at this point in my life, and y'all will still buy my music because I know for a fact that I make good music that will appeal to the fans and sound new to the fans. And Yeezus, prime example of that with the industrial sound, the new sound that would be so uncharacteristic of Kanye at the time, but obviously, you know, it plays more into the music he makes now as well.
1 second, if we pause.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure. Oh yeah. Okay.
Still rolling.
Kind of...
After the Yeezus era, it transitions over into that, what we would call the Life of Pablo meltdown era. And, you know, the Life of Pablo, years in the making. Finally released in 2016. And there were a lot of personal things going on in his life. Like, I believe on, was it Real Friends on the album that he talked about having $53 million in debt? Or was it, I forgot which song it was.
I don't think
it was like 30 hours or... It was a song off of the Life of Pablo.
I think it's all like the Charlie Heat remix of whatever.
I think so. Of the facts, yeah. But yeah, $53 million in personal debt. And on the Life of Pablo itself, he would talk about the peak of that duality concept where he wants to be a man of God, but it's the nature that, it's the lustful nature that he would be tapped into in the process. And it would show in the songs on the album as well, with Father Stretch My Hands, Ultralight Beam, Saint Pablo as well, being that man of God that he really wants to tap into, but he can't because, you know, on songs like Famous, on Fade, on, you know, like Feedback, he still has that outlandish style to him that he just can't get rid of.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you want to dive a little bit further into that as well.
Yeah, for sure. I think, well, Life of Pablo is a really interesting era. I think it's for us who, at least for me who became a Kanye fan during the Jesus King era, I think it's hard to understand because the first version of Life of Pablo we listened to, or at least I listened to, was mixed and mastered and sounded pretty dang good. This was, I think, one of the first cases, at least publicly with the use of streaming, that an album was improved off the original drop. Because I know that when the Life of Pablo was dropped, it was a lot more criticized for mixing and for different versions of stuff. And obviously that's all stuff that Kanye has fixed in post, making it a much better album. But I think it's interesting how much the quality of the music has affected Kanye's legacy. Yeah. Because I think, you know, if My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy wasn't a really great album, I think it's very likely that his entire story would be much, much, much different. But there's something about just making good music that gets the public on your side. Maybe we're just all simple fools and we just say, oh, sounds good, gives me dopamine, therefore I like you. I don't know exactly. But it is interesting to see how I think a lot of the stress was probably exacerbated during this time by the lack of maybe what people thought his best music could be. Yeah. I think obviously also during this time we have the robbery with Kim Kardashian. Yes. Yeah. And we have all this other mental health stuff that's going on. I think just to add to your point about duality, I feel like this is where he, interestingly, out of this Yeezus period where he feels like it swings fully the other way, where he's almost fully into the bad side of Kanye, like brash. You get Ultralight Beam, which is this sort of weird switch up. Yeah. And I think we'll cover that more with Jesus King, but there is an interesting sense here where he seems to get back to this central point of in this deep hardship, yet still finding faith and finding belief and finding something beyond it that he's wrestling with. And I think it's just interesting how it plays into the next chapter.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned the scandals that he would be in, like the mental health issues that he would be in after the Life of Pablo released, where he would go on tour, but then all of a sudden, due to these incidents that would be happening with Kim Kardashian's robbery, as well as the rant that he would go on at the last show in Sacramento, I believe just after the election happened, with talking about Trump and talking about making America great again, and him storming off the show early as well as being hospitalized for a psychiatric episode shortly afterwards. Kind of felt like, would this be the last we would see of Kanye for the time being? But there would be another era that would kind of transition into perfectly, which was we would call it the Trump era of Kanye. And it would have started with vocalizing his support for Trump leading up to the election. I believe they first met a week before or shortly after, if I'm not mistaken, at Trump Tower during the election season, and folks would be so mad that he would have, from their perspective, turned on them in the process through meeting with Trump, through formally endorsing him as well. And it would be a theme that we would see from 2016 to 2018, even with the release of his albums Yay and Kids See Ghosts, being commercially and critically successful in the process. It kind of felt like his public persona, through being a Trump supporter, would overshadow that in a way, especially with him publicly wearing the MAGA hat, him being in the Oval Office trying to get the passage of the Music Modernization Act. Also with the SNL performance, another instance, and I believe the most major incident that came out of that was the TMZ, another TMZ interview where he would go into how 400 years slavery, that must have been a choice, and that was it kind of felt like it was building up to this one big moment that would set things off again for Kanye publicly. And he would later apologize for it on, I believe it was a Chicago radio show, and he would even tear up in the process. There's video footage of that, but talk me through your thoughts about how, especially with the 2018 era of Kanye, with dealing with his mental health on a greater level that we had never seen before up to that point, trying to also coincide with his public support for President Trump in that era.
I think I feel like you did a pretty good job. I don't have much to add. I think I would just say it is interesting to track as far as, his backlash and yet success, I think it's interesting because I think even with the Trump stuff, which is weird because you wouldn't think it'd be weird. I mean, Trump won the presidency in 2016, so obviously a good bit of the nation at least liked him enough to vote for him. I think what made it so particular is it wasn't during in entertainment, that was not the popular voice. It was maybe the voice of the working man, but it wasn't the voice of Hollywood.
Yeah.
And so I think particularly that's what made him fail out of it.
Yeah.
I think what's interesting, I just want to add here something that came to mind.
Absolutely.
Is since the beginning, Kanye has really been the figure for difference.
I mean, so too.
Looking at Genius, he was completely different than the rappers that were on Rockefeller at the time.
And he wanted to embrace that as well.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And he wanted to be like, oh, I'm not shooting people, I'm not killing people, I'm wearing a backpack and a pink polo. but I'm rapping to what real people feel and real people think.
What I feel.
Exactly. Exactly. And what I feel. And I think we see that play out throughout his career, where it's like this sense of feeling like an outsider, even though he's upheld so high, yet still like feeling this difference and not really feeling, even the way he'll talk about it. We didn't really talk about this, but with the fashion brands and during the Yeezus era, like feeling like treated like an outsider, feeling like he wasn't being given a proper position and seat at the table. Is this just constant sense of feeling like an outsider, and different levels of like you said, embracing that. And I think we really see that with the Trump presidency and with the MAGA hat. I think a big part of his support is seeing Trump as the outsider, seeing him as this sort of dragon energy figure, this sort of bad boy, like him in a way similar to Jesus, maybe a little more restrained, but this sense of rejected and hated by the world, and he could vibe with that, and it felt like, I think if I was to look at the all the candidates in the past 20 years, to my knowledge, that like Democrat, Republican, I think I would say Trump is the closest to Kanye in just coming out of nowhere. Like, if you really look at the story of Trump's presidency and the story of Kanye's rap career, like the first 2 years, very similar as far as like, who are you? Like, who do you think? You do not fit the image of what we think a president is. You do not fit.
Anti-establishment.
You're like anti-establishment. You're kind of this bad boy figure. You're a mogul business guy. Like, who thinks you could be president? You're not like proper. You're saying inappropriate stuff. You're saying this. Oh, it's so bad. You're saying all this inappropriate stuff, but then like the working man is laughing at it. So there's a sense of which the institution is out of touch.
Yeah.
And say what you will about Trump, this isn't even an endorsement. It's just, I think there is a I can see why Kanye was drawn to him. Absolutely, in that similarity, and I think again, it's interesting to feel like, again, here he dropped 2 really great albums. Like, he dropped Ye, which is good, and Kissy Goes, which is great. And how really, like you said, I feel like every album, in a sense, is like the water that washes away the blood and washes away the dirt on Kanye. To the extent that it's
we
good.
Can get into that reference as well, washing away the blood, because but ultimately, eventually, Kanye would withdraw his support for Trump. I believe it was in timing with the George Floyd protests and disagreeing with how Trump really handled that in a way.
Yeah, I think 2018 is when he said, I think he did say in 2018, I'm distancing myself from politics.
November 2018, yeah. But then he would have like that little like closeted, I feel like closeted support for the president.
Yeah,
but then he would publicly kind of distance himself fully from President Trump at the time, where but then it would coincide with the next era we should get into, which is #Kanye 2020, because Kanye West would officially announce that he would be running for president in the 2020 presidential election as well, and it would coincide with so many things that would be going on in his life. Arguably the lowest that he had been mentally at the time, constantly ranting on Twitter about how the family's out to get him, after the comments he made at the South Carolina rally, where he publicly broke down as well. He would start things with other artists in the process, continue that Drake feud that would be on and off at the time, and releasing controversial content, like, okay, we'll start off with Wash Us in the Blood, because that was the first.
Wash us in the blood.
I was listening to the song earlier this morning, and
let it out, set it out.
Let it out, set it
Mexican
out.
country states.
Featuring Travis Scott, who only had 10 seconds in the entire track. But what was really interesting was the public reaction to the music video as well. If you remember, it was this like little distorted image of Kanye with and without like this mask on as well, that would be continually distorting in the process with all of this side footage in the background, GTA, cars doing donuts on the roads as well, and it would be this unorthodox music video that we would see from him. And I'll let you get into another song that he released later that year, coinciding with his presidential run.
Well, one of my favorite, obviously the greatest Kanye West song of all time was dropped during this era, inarguably. Nah, nah, nah. Boy, we never know Joe. Nah, nah, nah. That he dropped after, I believe, there was a glitch in some of the polling ballots, and it said that he'd won like 1 million votes in Ohio or something like that.
I think it was Iowa.
Or just
it was Iowa,
some random state, and he goes hyped up as if he was truly going to win president, and he dropped in celebration, nah, 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 which I think it came after a long drought in music, and
quote unquote long drought in music.
Yeah, what felt like a long drought in music. A long time, and I think fans were really hungry for something good, and it felt horrible, at least in the beat. I actually like the song still. It really grew on me, but that might be my obsession with it during the time. But I think in this era he just continued to, especially after he dropped out in 2020. We had him obviously urinating on the Grammy award.
Wild video.
So there's just a lot of, I feel like we get just this further, just more and more scandal, more and more just random sort of unneeded stuff. Like he sort of seems like, I think when he ran in 2020 and he didn't get all the endorsements that he felt he needed.
Yeah.
Like DaBaby was the only person that voted for Kanye, and because he got a feature on the song, and there seems to be a big point of like, I feel like he felt, I think during this period he really felt on all angles unheard and unsupported. Because this is also when he had all those rants about them not putting his kids in his school, and not feeling like he has an equal seat at the table with all the fashion brands, not feeling like he's an equal seat at the table with his own family, not feeling like these celebrities care or really care or listen to what he has to say, with not even giving him, just laughing at him when he says he wants to be president. And I think it's this thing he's battled with since the beginning, which is that, oh, you're not a rapper, you're a producer. And really just feeling that the seed of that has grown and grown throughout his career, and being, oh, you're not this, you're that.
Even
we get songs like Everything I Am on Graduation, where he's saying everything I'm not makes me everything I am. And so there's this constant sense of him not being this, him not being able to be president, him not being able to be a teacher, him not being able to be a fashion designer, him not being able to be a dad. And that, I think at a moment all that comes together and just weighs on him, and he kind of outbursts in these grand rejections of like, oh, well, if you don't want me, I don't want you at all. You don't think I can make good music? Well, I'm hitting on the Grammy, and I'm just going off, leaving, like just this kind of, like, instead of caving to this pressure, just exploding outwards against it. And obviously that is not the best for finding peace in your soul. In some ways.
Absolutely. You know who also voted for Kanye in 2020? Our boy. Kanye 2020.
Real one.
Yeah, but during the entire process, we would hear rumors that he would be making an album during the time. Talk about this album originally called God's Country, but now would be rebranded to what would become Donda. And I feel like that run had, if Kanye won president, we wouldn't have gone Donda, arguably. And it's one of our favorite Kanye albums to this very day. Just talking about, full sending that idea of having this weird but honest relationship with Christ, that would be playing into what he would be going through at the time with the struggles with his marriage and the struggles with his family, and it was a very compelling look in the process, because ultimately, while Kanye wouldn't be the most well at that time, it felt like it would be the most well we had seen him in a long time. And it resulted in one of the greatest album rollouts that we had ever seen in the process, with those three listening parties, and the overall hype surrounding the Donda album, with it felt like new features would be coming out like every single listening party, and these updated versions of songs. So that essentially is an era that still proved that he would have one of the biggest outreaches in hip hop at the time. Like, despite all of these mental and personal issues, Donda still performed extremely well. Went number one, 309,000 copies, and critically it was a little bit mixed, but still on that like little positive front, in the long term, where we would just get these compelling moments like Come to Life, No Child Left Behind, hearing The Weeknd on Hurricane, hearing all of these songs that felt like Kanye was still hungry to be in this again. And unfortunately, it would not be the case in the ensuing eras, because 2022 was a wild year for him, and it would start off with Donda 2 being in the conversation, one listening party for that being chaotic, but the STEM player being the only public release of Donda 2, and it's a wild era to think about, because even at that point Kanye was not really like having that much backlash in the public view, but then later that year it would all spiral when he came out with his anti-Semitic remarks, and go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say it's like, it is really interesting to track how much of Kanye's public love is just connected to how much good music he's making. Because I really I wonder, the question is to what extent is the public disdain about his anti-Semitic remarks fueled by how bad Donda 2 rollout was? I'm not going to say that there would not have been, and I think the majority of the public disdain probably is based just on the remarks themselves.
Yeah.
But I do wonder how much of the public vitriol would be different if Donda 2 was a 10 out of 10 album. And I mean, that's more just a question about the nature of artists and our appreciation of artists and how our love for them might affect our level-headedness. But it is interesting to see how much, so often when he is in public heat, it's either he hasn't dropped good music in a long time, or what he has just dropped is considered bad.
Yeah.
And how much that contributes to, even with 808s, how, a lot of this, really just coming off, obviously, as we end shortly, with what we think, if he will ever get out of this era, or what he could do to get out of it, just thinking about, how much making good music is affecting the vitriol. But yeah, obviously, Ivan probably knows. Twitter, he says we're going,
going DEFCON 3.
DEFCON 3 on the shoes, and says all this, which certainly probably does, before, nothing he's saying is completely, and I'm sure there's some people in the world, some neo-Nazis, that this really relates to and they can really feel empowered by.
Probably personal experiences that Kanye was genuinely going through.
Yeah, exactly. Going DEFCON 3.
Going DEFCON. I can't.
But
oh my goodness, that was a chaotic time.
Yeah. Anything to add before Vultures 1?
Yeah, no, honestly, and it would just be this continued media run of him doubling down on those comments that he would make, with the Alex Jones podcast, with the Tucker Carlson interview, coming out in a White Lives Matter shirt, with Candace Owens at the time, as well as the endorsements dropping for him as well with Adidas and Gap. Kind of really felt like first time in a while that we would see Kanye just out of it, quote unquote out of it, to where the public is now withdrawing themselves from him. And the public, the majority of the public would no longer be defending him, in a sense, because it's that idea of separate the art from the artist. But when those ideas are implemented into the music that he's making at the time, especially with that snippet that we saw, Someday We'll All Be Free.
Someday.
Should have been released on all streaming platforms. By the way, where he would definitely include that, Alex Jones podcast in the ending of the song,
Yeah.
where it's like, I love, and then it repeats, I love, which, I mean, fine, fine, like, the song itself was amazing. Amazing soul sample, chop up the soul Kanye,
Yeah.
like, we're getting that. But even with the release of that song, it's, as well as all of the other, like, we didn't even get to the Instagram post that he was, like, the other Instagram posts he was constantly making of, like, Pete Davidson,
Yeah.
and, like, threatening to beat up Pete Davidson publicly, throughout the full divorce process that he had been going through with Cam. 2022 was a wild year for him.
Yeah, I feel like he was making enemies with everyone at
Yeah.
that point. Like in the previous years, he picked one side and then just kind of he got hated from one direction and then got support from the other.
Yeah.
But I feel like he picked so many different enemies in 2022. It's hard. Like he had the Christians on his side, and then he was like anti-Semitic, which obviously is gonna draw a lot of them away from him. And then he was pro Kenneth Owens, which is gonna draw away like everyone's side. And then he was like almost anti in different ways. So it's like he almost was the person that could agree with everything Kanye was saying in 2022 is probably only Kanye.
Yeah.
Like he had
Absolutely.
alienated himself from so many people that I'm sure the 1,000 people that are still with him or with him at that point, like diehard, willing to be like, oh, nothing said wrong, or we're super diehard, I imagine. But it was just such a complete, absolute just fall into being the bad boy, but not even with public support, just the bad boy that is the bad boy.
Yeah, I wonder if Copper's going into shot right now, by the way. She absolutely is.
Yes.
The
She's
goat,
freaked out
Copper.
about it, Copper.
Yeah.
So I feel like just for sake of time, maybe perhaps we can do wrap up and lead into our personal takeaways.
Yeah, because, I mean, ultimately this current era, continuing with Vultures 1 and 2 not receiving the public reception that Kanye wanted, and dealing with all these other, like, recent allegations that have come up of Kanye being put on nitrous and being put on a nitrous addiction from his dentist. So I guess to lead into our wrap-up discussion, why, I feel like you can go before me on this, but why could it be over for Kanye?
Yeah, I really think it's an interesting place for Kanye right now, and Kanye fans in general, because I think never before has it seemed so much like it could be over. I mean, obviously every single time it's probably felt like that, because each time it's gotten worse, but it does feel to a particular extent like the people that he has targeted and the places he's put him in are particularly difficult to rise out of, given the circumstances. And I think that a lot would need to change in his own personal life, because it feels like there's obviously a deeper spiritual matter going on here, and there's a deeper disorder in his own life. And while that might be fun to watch the train crash for a while, there's a point when it's funny and there's a point when it's just sad.
Yeah.
And I feel like a lot of Kanye fans, people in general, especially with all the allegations about nitrous addiction that seem valid in my opinion. There's just, I've never before seen such just let him rest, just like stop, Kanye. Like, we don't want any more music if it means this is how you're gonna be, especially with the quality of the music being made just being subpar. It really does feel like I don't, unless there's major change in his personal life, let alone the music, that he'll ever get back to the point of critical acclaim and public love, and even relevance. Because the thing is, even when he was a bad boy, Jesus there and Pablo, he was relevant. But I think now people are just so tired of trying to keep up and put up with him, because it's just sad.
Yeah, and I don't really have much to add on that front, to where I feel like my view on it is you if you're causing this much public controversy, you've got to make it up somehow, and Kanye was able to do that in the past with the good music that he was making, the amazing music he was making, but we're just not getting that this year. With that being said, check the timing on that.
Oh no. That's okay. This camera just got full, so hopefully these are still recording.
Yeah. But I feel like, with that being said, it dives into a theory I have where I feel like during the whole divorce process, Kanye was essentially welcomed into this cult of the controversial people surrounding him, with his dentist, with even Milo, with Bianca, even with Ty Dolla $ign, as a way to cope with his unhappiness and his mental disorders going on, and could very well lead into that nitrous being true. Who knows? We'll have to see from here. But it felt like he was falling back into that full lust culture instead of that Christian-based man that we would see from him from 2018 to 2021. With that being said, there is a way that I feel like he could recover from this. First, and I have this underlined in the notes that we have here, he needs to separate from Ty Dolla $ign, content-wise, and Ty Dolla $ign has historically been that person of, the lustful nature in his music, the club bangers, the party lifestyle, nothing wrong with that standalone, I will say. But when you try to merge that into the person that Kanye West was, with trying to be better, trying to tap in closer with God, but have all of these mental struggles going on for him at the same time, I think it was a bad influence in a way, to really have this observed from Kanye, to where he could also play into that culture, and those are the albums that we're getting now. I feel like also that I think he needs to be a self-made man again, in my opinion, because with that Genius documentary, it was a really good insight of how much of a self-made man he was at the very beginning of his career, even with, him having, like, those scenes with Donda on his side, where, you just felt this hustle from him, you felt this grind, you felt this passion, but it just doesn't seem to be there anymore now that there's others in the process, with Ty, with Eric as his manager, with just all of these folks surrounding him that tap into that side of Kanye that doesn't necessarily make good music anymore. And I feel like to really recover from this, I think Kanye's just got to tap into being his own individual again, like, that self-reflection, the beautiful process that we would see in Genius, where he was hungry. I feel like even though he doesn't need to tap into that side, it kind of feels like he needs to tap into that side to gain the public's good persona, good graces back. And I leave the floor to you. What can Kanye do to recover from this?
Yeah, well, I think he needs to become a monk, probably. Most likely. I think, well, we didn't really touch on this, but I think for me, when I got into Kanye West was during Jesus King era. I'm a Christian, and that's what really drew me to him and the music in general. I really didn't listen to music much before I got into Kanye, and I listened to Jesus King like once a day for probably a month. Yeah. Like the whole album, front to back. I just really enjoyed it, and it kind of got me into music, listening to music in general, so I feel a responsibility to it. And so I think, just to wrap up quickly, I think it shows there's something interesting during that period where Kanye was making it. He had in the documentary, he was talking about this idea of like, oh, I don't want any negativity anymore. I just want positivity. I don't want to even say I'm not hungry. I want to say I'm satisfied or something, because of the negativity and not. And I think there's something interesting about this against his duality that he lived for his whole life. This sense of almost being perfect, it feels like, of life being perfect, of having all this positive energy, of being like, my life is perfect, God is good, he's giving there was financial success, Jesus King blew up monetarily, Vultures blew up monetarily, and yet the problem with God is that God makes good things happen to both sinners and righteous people, and God brings suffering on the righteous for their greater good. Like obviously, we see this in the figure of Christ, who is God, who also maximally suffered. And so it's like, I think in some ways it seems like Kanye had such an image of Christianity at that point that was like, I'm riding with God and God will prosper me, which is true. But sometimes that prospering means that maybe despite your best efforts, you still get divorced.
Yeah.
But that is, I mean, obviously, I'm saying this with the greatest humility because I'm not trying to say that that's just something easy to process and he should have just been, his faith should have been unchecked by that. But I think in a lot of ways, as we see with later statements like he made recently, like, oh, like, where was God when I prayed? You know, like, where was he with my marriage and all this stuff? Like, this sense of like, oh, God didn't show up for me.
Right.
And so why should I show up for him? Where I think he has a sort of 2D vision of God.
Yeah.
And I think what that has caused is it's, you know, the Bible talks about when you have a demon and it kind of goes away for a time and you clean up and sweep and make your house ordered of your soul. And then but don't actually address the issue.
Yeah.
Don't fill your house with something meaningful. It'll come back with 7 more demons. And I feel like for me that's what kind of felt like the aftermath of Jesus King and Donda is like this. He's kind of swept up his house nice, but he didn't fill it fully with Christ or with the true understanding of the gospel of suffering.
Yeah.
And of martyrdom that is necessary. And because of that, when he didn't succeed, it felt like God had abandoned him. But perhaps that's exactly what God needed him to go through. And so I haven't lost faith in Kanye, but I think that through his life he's been a wrestling Christian, which makes meaningful art. But I think he needs to find Christ if he's ever going to not just make meaningful music, but be a meaningful father.
Yeah.
And get over his battle with lust, which he's battled since he was young. I mean, we watched the documentary.
Yeah.
He was buying like a pornography magazine. He talked about that when he was 5. She struggled with lust, pornography, so life. We all have. But I think particularly him, when you get in a position of power and money, and you can do whatever you want to whoever you want and marry whoever you want, it's like you can be so enabled in that and live out your fantasies in a way that's actually horrific in some ways.
Yeah.
And so I think really, I think what Kanye needs to do is obviously get out of the circles he's getting out of. I think, like we saw with Andre 3000, good music. Like, the guy's gone #1 on Billboard for 10 albums in the past 20 years. I think he could not drop an album for 5 years and it'd be fine. I think he needs to drop out, go spend time with his kids, be alone for a while, maybe go to the mountains and just take a break, take a Sabbath, rest, spend time with God, ground himself, and then consider whether or not he thinks an album is what he needs in his life, because he has enough money to live off of now. I think he really needs to, before he even considers making any more music, contemplate what he needs to do to get his soul right. And I really think that would be the best thing for him.
Absolutely. Yeah, and and we'll see what happens from here. Honestly, like I pray for the best. We continuously pray for the best for Kanye. With especially if Vultures 3 is gonna ever come out. Hopefully Vultures 3 ends up being a passion project, like a true passion project for him, where he could somehow tap in, like, if not at least show signs of tapping back into that mindset that made Kanye. Because if not, and it bombs, then feels like he would be forced to step back and really carefully consider like his choices in a way.
Yeah, I think for me it's like, me personally, if Vultures isn't successful, I mean, if Kanye doesn't change as a person, I hope Vultures 3 bombs, and I hope that Vultures 2, because I really want to wake up. I want him to wake up, and if it takes Vultures 3 just absolutely sucking as well, so that he might step away from the limelight for a while, which I don't know if he could ever do that, but because I think that's really what he needs personally.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll see what happens from here. And this is coming from 2 folks who have been such good fans of Kanye for a number of years, for as long as we can remember. So we genuinely hope for the best for him. So with that being said, I feel like that concludes.
That's a wrap.
That's a wrap for the latest episode of the Listen to This podcast. And it's been a great time taking this time with you to really reflect on Kanye's own Eras tour in a way, and really analyzing what needs to happen next, in our opinion, of course. So with that being said, I hope y'all have an amazing time listening to this, as well as other episodes of the podcast. And shout out to the boy, George, came all the way from California.
Just for this episode.
We in Memphis,
That's all that
and yeah, with that being said, that's a wrap.
That's a wrap.
That'll be it.
Like, comment, subscribe.
Like, comment,
share
subscribe.
with your friends who think they'll like it.
Yeah.
Share with Kanye West so we can
please
get his life
share
straight.
this with Kanye West. You know, email this. You know, if you have his number.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll see y'all in the next episode. Peace. Yes, sir.
Just kidding.
Yeah. No.
The Rock is still alive.
The Rock is in
Illuminati.
the building.
Okay. Let's go.
We did it.
Successful episode.